The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered porch as Samuel Garrett's coffee grew cold in his trembling hands. 3 days had passed since he'd found her. The Cherokee woman collapsed beneath his oak tree, clutching something against her chest with a desperation that spoke of secrets darker than the prairie night. Her fever had broken yesterday, but the fear in her dark eyes remained, sharp as winter wind. She sat now at his kitchen table, wrapped in his dead wife's shawl, fingers wrapped around a leather pouch that seemed to burn her palms. Samuel had seen men protect gold with less fervor, had watched soldiers guard ammunition with less terror. Whatever lay within that worn leather had marked this woman in ways that went deeper than the infected wound on her shoulder. "You saved my life," she whispered, her English careful, measured. "But some debts cannot be repaid." Samuel set down his cup, the porcelain clicking against wood like bones settling in a grave. For 37 years he'd worked this land, buried his parents in the hard earth behind the barn, laid his wife to rest under the cottonwood she'd loved. He understood the weight of secrets, the way they could hollow a person from the inside. "What's in the pouch?" Her grip tightened until her knuckles went white. "Promise me you won't look. Promise me you'll burn it when I'm gone." But Samuel had learned long ago that some promises were made to be broken. The way she held that leather, the way her whole body seemed to curve around it like a shield, it reminded him of something. A memory, distant and painful, of another woman who'd clutched something precious in her final moments. "Please," she begged, and her voice cracked like dry earth under drought. "Don't pull it off. Don't open it. Some things should stay buried." Samuel reached across the table, and she flinched as if his fingers were flames. The Cherokee woman, she'd given her name as Ayanna, watched him with the wariness of a cornered wolf. Samuel's hand hovered inches from the pouch, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from the leather, close enough to catch the faint metallic scent that seemed to cling to it like smoke. "My husband was a traitor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He found things. Collected them. This was his greatest treasure." Samuel pulled his hand back. "Was? The cavalry came through our settlement 6 moons ago. They said we had stolen artifacts, sacred things that belonged in museums. My husband tried to explain, but they—" Her words dissolved into silence, but Samuel could fill in the spaces. He'd seen the aftermath of such encounters, the way justice wore a uniform and spoke with rifles. "They killed him for what's in there." Ayanna's nod was barely perceptible. "They searched everything. Burned our home. But they never found this. He hid it before they took him away." Samuel studied the woman's face, noting the fresh grief that lived there alongside older sorrows. He'd worn that same expression after Mary's passing, had seen it reflected in his shaving mirror for months afterward. But there was something else in Ayanna's eyes, a fear that went beyond loss, beyond mourning. "What makes it worth dying for?" She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against wooden floor like fingernails on stone. "You don't understand. Some knowledge, it changes everything. It makes you responsible for things you never wanted to know." Samuel rose too, and they stood facing each other across the small kitchen, the pouch between them like a fault line ready to split the earth. Outside, his cattle lowed in the distance, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. This was his world, simple, honest, bounded by fence posts and seasonal rhythms. "Please," Ayanna whispered again. "Burn it. Let it turn to ash and blow away on the wind." But Samuel's fingers were already moving toward the leather ties. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the morning stillness like gunshots. Samuel's hand froze on the pouch as Ayanna went rigid, her face draining of color until she resembled carved bone. Through the kitchen window, dust clouds rose on the horizon, riders, at least 6 of them, moving with the purposeful speed of men on a mission. "They found me," she breathed, and the pouch seemed to grow heavier in Samuel's grip. "Who?" "Colonel Morrison's men. They'd been hunting this thing for months." Her eyes met his, wild with panic. "If they find it here, they'll kill us both. They can't let anyone know what it contains." Samuel moved to the window, squinting against the morning glare. The riders wore blue, their brass buttons catching sunlight like warning signals. Military. Disciplined. The kind of men who followed orders without question and buried their doubts in unmarked graves. "Hi," he said, but Ayana was already shaking her head. "There's nowhere to run. They have trackers, men who can follow a shadow across stone." She pressed her palms against the table, leaning forward with desperate intensity. "Open it now, before they arrive. You need to understand what you're dying for." Samuel's hands trembled as he held the pouch. The leather was old, soft with handling, but the ties remained strong. Whatever secrets lay within had been carefully preserved, protected with a reverence that spoke of enormous significance. Or enormous guilt. The hoofbeats grew closer, and with them came the jingle of spurs, the creak of leather, the metallic whisper of weapons being checked. Professional sounds. Dangerous sounds. "They'll want to search the house," Samuel said. "Yes. And if they find you here?" Ayana met his gaze steadily. "They'll assume you know everything. They'll make sure you can never tell anyone what you've learned." Samuel looked down at the pouch in his hands, then back at the woman who'd brought death to his doorstep. In the distance, he could make out individual riders now, hard men with weathered faces and cold eyes. Men who'd perfected the art of making problems disappear. The leather ties came undone in his shaking fingers. Inside the pouch lay a photograph, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. Samuel's world tilted on its axis as he stared at the image, soldiers in Union blue standing over a mass grave, their faces proud with accomplishment. But it wasn't the grave that made his breath catch in his throat. It was the date written on the back in careful script, Sand Creek, November 29, 1864. And it was the face of the young lieutenant in the front row, grinning at the camera with the careless confidence of the righteous. A face Samuel recognized. A face that belonged to Colonel James Morrison, the man whose riders were now pulling up to his gate. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. Ayana moved beside him, her voice hollow with old pain. "My husband took this from a dead photographer at Sand Creek. The man was documenting the massacre for the army, but he couldn't stomach what he saw. He tried to destroy the plates, but my husband saved this one." Samuel's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Sand Creek. He knew the official story, a battle against hostile Indians, a necessary action to protect settlers. But this photograph told a different truth, one written in the slack faces of dead children and the satisfied expressions of their killers. "Morrison was there," Samuel said, and it wasn't a question. "He led the charge against the women and children while the warriors were away hunting. 300 dead. Babies, grandmothers, pregnant women. And now he's a respected colonel, decorated for his service to the frontier." The sound of boots on his porch steps made them both freeze. A heavy knock rattled the door, followed by a voice that carried the authority of brass and blood. "Samuel Garrett! This is Colonel Morrison, United States Army. We need to speak with you about a fugitive." Samuel looked at the photograph again, at Morrison's young face beaming over carnage, then at Ayana's scarred hands. She reached out and touched his wrist gently. "Now you understand," she whispered. "This is bigger than both of us. This is about justice for the dead." The knock came again, more insistent. "Mr. Garrett!" Samuel folded the photograph carefully and slipped it inside his shirt, feeling the weight of 300 souls settling against his heart. Samuel opened the door to find Colonel Morrison on his threshold, older now, silver-haired and distinguished, wearing his authority like a well-tailored coat. The man's pale eyes swept the interior of the house with professional thoroughness, noting details, cataloging potential threats. "Colonel. Mr. Garrett. We're tracking a Cherokee woman, armed and dangerous. She may have sought shelter here." Morrison's voice carried the polished confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Samuel felt the photograph burning against his chest like a brand. "Haven't seen anyone." Morrison smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I'm sure you understand the importance of cooperation in matters of national security. This woman has stolen sensitive military documents. Propaganda that could damage relations with our Indian allies. Propaganda. Lies designed to inflame tensions. Fabricated evidence of supposed atrocities. Morrison stepped closer, and Samuel could smell the pomade in his hair, the leather of his gloves. The kind of inflammatory material that starts wars, Mr. Garrett. The kind that gets innocent people killed. Behind him, 5 soldiers waited in perfect formation, their hands resting casually on their weapons. Men who'd perfected the art of following orders without asking questions. Men who'd learned to sleep soundly after making problems disappear. Samuel's hand moved involuntarily to his chest, feeling the photograph's sharp edges through the fabric of his shirt. 300 souls, crying out for justice across 20 years of silence. Haven't seen her, he repeated. Morrison studied his face for a long moment, then nodded to his men. Search the house. As the soldiers spread through his home, Samuel stood motionless on his porch, watching Morrison's face. The colonel's expression remained pleasant, professional, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator weighing odds. You know, Mr. Garrett, this is beautiful country. Peaceful. It would be a shame if violence came to such a place. Samuel nodded slowly. Yes, it would. Morrison smiled again, and this time Samuel caught a glimpse of the young lieutenant in the photograph. The same casual cruelty, refined by decades but never diminished. When the soldiers returned empty-handed, Morrison tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Garrett. We'll be watching the roads. If you see anything unusual, you know where to find us. Samuel watched them ride away, dust settling in their wake like a shroud. Only when they disappeared beyond the horizon did he allow his shoulders to sag, his hands to finally stop shaking. Inside, Ayanna emerged from the root cellar, her face streaked with tears. You kept it, she whispered. Samuel pulled the photograph from his shirt, staring once more at Morrison's young face. Some debts can only be paid with truth. The sun was setting over his ranch, painting the sky the color of old blood, and Samuel Garrett finally understood that some promises were worth more than life itself.